22 years old when I went to prison. I was 30 years old when I went to prison.
I was at the age of 19. I had just turned 19.
Hi, I'm Chris, and I help life-sentenced men transition from institutionalized prison life back into society. Every one of our men has already served 25 to 45 years in prison. I serve on the board of the Corrections Transition Program at Everglades Correctional Institution in Miami, Florida. I teach these men life skills and how to speak, listen, and think. So when they get paroled, they become assets to their communities rather than liabilities of the state. Welcome to Men Going Home. I'm Chris Wolfe, and we've got another great show for you today because we are the only show that brings you access to a segment of society very few people know anything about. Men who have spent 30, 35, and even 40 years in prison. We'll talk to them about their crimes, their life in prison, and what their transition back into the free world was like after all those years. Now, before we welcome our special guest today, please welcome my good friend and co-host, Andy Korge. Andy, welcome to the show.
Hey, Chris, thanks for having us. Let everyone know, if you want to listen to this program, you could always get the podcast on Apple, Stitcher, Google, Spotify, and anywhere you get podcasts. Just search Men Going Home. But Chris, thanks for having me. It should be a really interesting show today. We got a great guest. I'm looking forward into delving into, his background and what got him into prison and what it's been like being out of prison the last few years since he's come back into society.
It'll be fascinating on a number of levels that we'll get into. But before we talk with today's special guest, let's talk about last week's guest, John Eddings. Fascinating on many levels as well.
Yeah, I mean, John was a scintillating story. I mean, here was a guy that escaped from confinement, not once, not twice, not 3 times, but 4 times.
And 11 attempts,
right?
And 4 successful attempts, twice out of county lockup and twice out of Florida State Prison.
Florida State Prison twice, one time on the lam, as they say, for over a year, and probably could have, had he not committed another crime and gotten caught, probably would have, been a Whitey Bulger or something, living on the streets of LA or something.
And he got married in California while he was on the lam. But what was interesting is that today, first of all, prisons are much more locked down today than they were 40 years ago.
Yeah.
And secondly, with social media and all the 24/7 cable news networks, I just can't imagine a guy being able to do that as easily as he did.
Yeah, he was an escape artist and a Houdini, if you will. And that was really interesting. But my real big takeaway from all of that show was sort of how he got into crime at a very, very young age. And it seemed like he got into it as a form of acceptance.
Correct.
Because he wanted to be accepted by his friends. He mentioned, he as a young teenager, he moved with his family to the Cocoa Beach area and, wanted to get sort of accepted with the older kids in his neighborhood, and started stealing. And that sort of elevated to more crimes where he was, cultivating armed robbery on a pretty regular basis for a period of about 7.5 years.
He also talked about peer pressure, and peer pressure was one of the reasons that he started stealing cigarettes and alcohol for acceptance with the older kids.
Yeah.
And peer pressure has been a common denominator with many of the men in our program at Everglades Correctional Institution, and even something that today's guest will talk about.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, in so much that there seems to be, like you said, some common denominators that hopefully people will be listening to this show or watching this show on any of the social media platforms. And maybe some people that are kind of getting into crime now that can see how these situations end up putting you in a bad place, and that's prison.
And in the original video that we made for the National Marijuana Initiative, we talked about the common denominators. And with almost every case, it's a combination of hanging around the wrong group of people growing up, using alcohol and drugs, peer pressure, and just flat out making bad choices and bad decisions. And that's what we'll hear today from our guest. So let's introduce today's guest and get this show on the road. Our today's guest, José Nerey, spent almost 29 years in prison after being convicted of first-degree murder at the age of 16. He received a life sentence plus 2 additional 15-year sentences. He has survived over 28 years in some of the country's most violent prisons. He was paroled in 2018, and he is here today to tell his story. Please welcome José. Your story is fascinating. So let's start out with your early years.
Yes.
You were born in New Orleans to a single mother by all accounts.
Mhm.
However, you were raised in Florida in Carroll City and Cutler Ridge. Talk about that.
Well, we are growing up in a single, my mother and my brother and I, it came a time when we were living in New Orleans from, her telling me the story. It's just hard living. It couldn't get, any jobs, couldn't provide for us. So she decided to move to Miami. And upon moving down here, we settled down in Carroll City area, and that's where I grew up. I ended up going to Myrtle Grove Elementary, and then from there, around the 6th grade.
That was a pretty rough neighborhood to be living in, both Carroll City and Cutler Ridge, relatively low income, some high crime areas. What was that like for you growing up in those areas?
Growing up in Carroll City at that time, late 70s into the early 80s, I was one of approximately 5 Hispanics that I could remember in my neighborhood. I remember when we initially moved into the neighborhood the following day, I went outside to try to find some kids, just to play with, and I got jumped on, got beat up by 4 or 5 of the neighborhood guys, brothers, black guys, and they had a little nickname for me. They used to call me Zebra, or Pancho. And, that was my initiation, my welcome to Carroll City.
And why did they call you Zebra?
Because I was a mix between a white guy and a black guy. So I was like in the middle. So they branded me Zebra just because I was a mix.
And you had one brother who you say is night and day different from you?
Yeah, he's diametrically opposite from me. My brother was a homebody. He never wanted to go out. He was kind of afraid of the neighborhood, while I, on the other hand, gravitated to the street life. I gravitated out to the community, and I wanted to engage and socialize.
Well, you told me the other day that you started, because I asked you, when did you turn down the wrong path? And you said it was around the age of 13, 14, you were in junior high. What led you down the wrong path?
The road towards the wrong path initially arose from a need to create more wealth. Mind you, we're an impoverished community, and my mother wasn't making that much money. And I had, from my youth, I think I remember sharing in our conversation that I started working around age 8. My first job was with the Miami News selling subscriptions. And after that, I started working for the Miami Herald through a lady called Miss Patty down in Carroll City. And I will help her fold papers and deliver to homes. And then afterwards, leaving there, when I moved down south to Cutler Ridge, I started working for a lawn service company, Clean Cut Lawn Service. And while going to school, so on the weekends I will work there, and in summertime I work full time. So all that was done.
But you met, when I ask you what led you down the wrong path, I believe you met a couple of guys named John and Andre.
Yes.
Whose parents were drug dealers.
Yes.
So how did that kind of change your life?
Well, in the same vein of trying to gain money, as I met these 2 guys, John and Andre, of Colombian descent, they introduced me to a life of fast money. So
how so?
Well, I remember one day being brought into the house and taken into a room where they opened a closet, and there was big bales of marijuana, like big blocks, and they cut it open. You can hear the air just rush in. It's, because it was airtight, sealed, and we pinched some weed, and it was one of the first times I smoked weed. I wasn't really a drug addict or anything, but I saw how fast money was being made. And so they were the ones that kind of introduced me to a rough, the rough life, the street life, the more crime, the life of crime.
But they introduced you to, that was when you could, because at the time you were, as you said, you were working in lawn service.
Yeah.
I believe you started a DJ business.
Yes, I did.
But that was all hard work, not as much money, not as fast. They introduced you to fast money. And correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that one of their parents initiated or recruited you guys to rob another house that had drugs in it. Talk about that.
So I was approached one evening by, one of the brothers, and who expressed to me that one of the parents, the father, the stepfather, it wasn't his real dad, wanted, a couple guys to go break into this house where there was supposed to be some drugs, some cocaine, and that they would reward us. So upon doing the robbery, we went in. We didn't find all the cocaine that we thought we would find, but we found the safe. We found maybe 8 ounces of coke, but we also found some weapons. We found a shotgun and a .380 with a pearl handle and all the, and other little miscellaneous jewelry. So we gathered the property that we were stealing, and I stayed with the guns. So upon leaving that night, we were going to divvy up the property and I was going to get paid. I decided to remain with the weapons.
The guns.
You
were drawn to the weapons.
I was drawn to the weapons.
Which is
let me ask you, was there a certain level of excitement then to all this that you had never really experienced before?
Yes, extremely. Because I've never broken into anybody's house, and I just that wasn't my thing. That wasn't a lifestyle of mine. Because we've had our house broken into, and I just kind of despised that. The excitement, the adrenaline rush was that we were in somebody's house, and my goodness, it was just wild. And the idea of having the guns, as I shared with you, the thrill of having the guns was also part of a cultural element of that time. Because that was the time where gangster rap was really getting on the main front in the national stage with groups like NWA and Ghetto Boys. And this was like the cultural music and being social misfits and rebels. And so having a gun or being that kind of daredevil type person was looked upon as something special, like a badge of honor.
And getting rid of those guns on the street was not hard to do?
No, actually. At that time, it was quite easy. There were many gangs, as I'm sure there are now, but back then the prevalent gangs was IMPs, the Latin Disciples, Latin Kings, and La Familia in that area. So all those gang members wanted weapons for one reason or another.
Now, Jose, what's interesting is that you broke in there to get, because you had heard there was cocaine there, but there really wasn't that much. You found a cache of guns. Yeah. It was interesting is that you told me you really had no interest in being a drug dealer back then. You were drawn to the guns, which is interesting because a few years later, the guns led to your demise. Yeah. Now, why was it that you didn't want to deal in drugs? That was very easy money.
Very easy money, but it takes a certain type of person and a type of character to really be a front street dope dealer. And I was never one that wanted to be out in the open. I never wanted to be exposed to the possibility of being arrested that way. I tried it once, and then I had my friend do it, and I just didn't like the element, the crackheads and the needy and the craving, and I just didn't want that scene. I wanted to be able to do something to make me fast money and then move on and get out of the way onto the next project.
You know what's interesting is that this is 1986, 1987. Gangster rap is in, and you actually shied away from being a drug dealer. You became an arms dealer at age 14 or 15.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
Yeah, the situation arose while, doing these block parties or house parties, because I was DJing at the time. I had started a DJ business called Cold Crush DJs. It was me, a friend of mine named George Davis, Herbert. And so we started this business. And in the process of doing this, we would meet guys at some of these parties in Perrine. in South Miami and in Goulds. And we would meet guys who were looking for weapons, but we also carried weapons to these parties, because in a lot of these bad neighborhoods, there would be a lot of shootings or attempted armjackings and stuff like that. So we needed to be equipped to defend ourselves in the event somebody would try to rob us.
Now, you needed to find a supply of guns now.
Yes.
All right. And what's interesting is that you actually found a crooked Hialeah police officer who provided you with guns. At one point, he even sold you a Tech 9 automatic weapon with a silencer.
Yes, this was a situation that was brought about through my friend John, and we were able to purchase actually a Tech 9 that was confiscated off the streets. And the officer, I suppose, wanting to make a little side money, sold it to us in
How
a
much?
discreet fashion. It was $2,000.
But when you buy a silencer, isn't a silencer for the purpose of killing somebody?
Oh, yes. And the silencer alone is a 15-year federal offense.
Wow.
Back then, I don't know what it is now, but that was the
And
time.
you bought it for the purpose of selling it.
For selling it for resale.
And at this point in time, at your age, you weren't thinking about any of the repercussions, right?
No. I tell guys, in different arenas that at that time, as a 16-year-old, you're only living in the moment, in the thrill of the moment, and you're looking for the attention and the glamour, the hype. It gives you a sense of worth and significance. Like if, you're really special, but don't really realize at that moment that the repercussions of your actions can cost you your life. I mean, a child at that age doesn't have the foresight to see that these actions could actually cause him literally their life, either the rest of their life in prison or death on the streets. Yeah.
So while you're now an arms dealer at the age of 14, 15 years old, you're going to school, you're working at a lawn service, you're working as a DJ, and you're an arms dealer. How much money are you making every week selling guns?
Roughly, on average, $200 a week, I would say.
That's pretty good money.
200. Yeah. Some days, some weeks it'd be 600, but on average, let's say 200.
All right. Now, big turning point in your life. Big turning point. You break up with your girlfriend.
Yeah.
And you meet a beautiful young lady named Nanushka.
Yeah.
Tell us about Nanushka and what happened.
Well, Nanushka was a beautiful young lady that I met. And I don't even quite remember how we met, but I do remember that when we met, there was, chemistry there, there was sparks flying. And so we became, intimate, getting to know each other. And through her is where I ended up eventually meeting my co-defendants, which is her brother.
Right. But before that, the big red flag goes up. You go to Nanushka's house.
Yeah.
And her brother's there with some friends, the mother, everybody smoking crack.
Yeah. What I didn't realize, and it wasn't the initial visitation, it was on subsequent visitations when I came over to the house. I found that the mother was acting erratic. Her hair was all frizzy. And I found, the little cellophane wrappers with the crack, and I found them smoking. And then I saw her brother, and his friends coming out of the room as well. So I just led me to assume that they were crackheads as well. But I knew the mother was out there. Yeah.
So let's talk about as things go from bad to worse. You're working as a DJ one night at a party.
Yes, sir.
And you see Nanushka's brother, Steve, there, correct?
Yes.
And he's got these friends, Chadrick and Cornell. They're there, and they'd offer to drive you home, correct?
Somewhat. It was after I left the party.
Okay.
And I came to their house to see Nanushka's, where I met Steve and his friends, because they were at the house.
And because you're an arms dealer, you always had your case with weapons in it.
Yeah.
And they give you a ride home. What happens?
So that night, I had a little briefcase that I always used to carry. And within the briefcase, I had a Smith & Wesson 45 millimeter. I had a 380, a silver 380 with a pearl handle. And I believe I had the Tech 9 in there, but without the silencer. And I carried it with me to the party because there were some people I was going to do some business with there. And we didn't make a transaction, so I was going home. I was dropped off at Nanushka house by my request because I wanted to see the young lady. And obviously my ambitions were to have an intimate night with her. Upon getting there and seeing all her brother and friends there, I knew that wasn't going down. So they offered, to take me home. So upon getting in the car with Steve, Chad, and Cornell, we began to drive home. And on the way home is where the incident transpired that changed my life forever. On the way home, I stayed on 180th Southwest, right in front of South Miami Heights Elementary School. Mm-hmm. I stayed right in front of it. And on the way there, we passed a gentleman who was on a bicycle, who had a gold chain, and I think a bracelet on his neck.
And it's nighttime. It's very dark.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
It's dark. Matter of fact, I'm in the passenger side rear seat. I believe Chad is driving and Steve is in the passenger and Cornell's next to me in the back seat. And so I didn't see the gentleman when we passed. They saw him, and the first thing I believe Cornell and Chad said, "Man, look, he's got some jewelry, man. Let's get that jewelry, man." So I looked at him and I was like, man, I've never strong-armed nobody. That wasn't my thing. I wasn't into taking from the weak or abusing people like that. That wasn't my
So he's obviously wearing a lot of gold chains.
Wearing a gold
1986,
chain.
1987. Everybody's wearing gold, and so this guy says, "Let's get the gold."
And you had guns on you.
And I had
guns on them
in a case at this point.
And in the briefcase. And they knew I had the guns because I had showed them before. Right. They knew what I was. They knew my business. So Cornell asked, "Man, can we borrow one of your guns?" And I told him no, because I, growing up, in the hood, you never, we had our little code of ethics. You never hand nobody a loaded gun, that you don't know. Nonetheless, he turned it on you and shoot you. So I told him, "Nah, I ain't doing that." So he said, "Well, man, we want to jack this guy." So I offered, because if Steve was in the car, and this is where kind of peer pressure is, because I wanted to be all right with Nanushka's brother, Steve, who was in the car. I didn't want to come off as punking him or not trying to help him come up, because I wanted access to his sister.
Correct.
So I volunteered my services. I said, "Steve, I'll tell you what I'll do. What I will do, I'll get out the car and I'll jack the man. I'll put him on the floor, but I'm not touching him. I don't want nothing of it. You guys get what you're going to get, and then let's get out of here. That's the best I do for you, but I'm not letting nobody hold my gun." He said, all right, let's do that. So we did a U-turn, came back around. And when we got up to where the gentleman was, we passed him, say about maybe 20 yards. I jumped out of the car and I walked over towards the gentleman. And I told him, "Hey, man, this is a jack. Don't make it a homicide. Just lay on the ground." And he laid on the ground. He complied, and he laid down prostrate face first on the ground. And so I had the gun over him, waiting for Chad or somebody to get out the car, because the agreement, again, I don't know if I mentioned it, but the agreement was, you guys get the stuff. I'm not touching it.
Right. You were just holding the guy by gun, and they were going to take what they wanted. You didn't want any part of that. And they wouldn't get out of the car.
And they wouldn't get out the car. So what seemed like an eternity, I say 15, 20 seconds, nobody's moving. So I look back at the car trying to see if somebody's coming. When I look back, the gentleman that's on the ground, he's like doing a push-up, raising up to turn around. So I take a step back, because I don't know if he's going to try to reach up and grab the gun, right? So I tell him, I say, "Hey, man, chill. This thing's going to be over in a minute. Chill, bro." So when I turn back the second time and I cry, I say, "Man, what's up, man? Come on." Finally, somebody gets out the car, and it's Cornell, and he walks over towards me. But he's walking so nonchalantly that I get upset and frustrated, because I'm anxious. The gun is shaking in my hand, because I've never jacked anybody in my life.
And wait 1 second.
Yeah.
You're younger than these other three guys.
I'm 16 and they're 18 and older. They're 18, 19, 21.
And the robbery was their idea, so you're the young guy.
Okay. And you're in the middle of a street where the cars could possibly pass by. You don't want to stand there.
Or a police officer.
Exactly. So the gentleman is laying in the grass near a street lamp off to the side. It's still kind of dark. You don't know where he is. Like there's a shadow cast on him. And we're in front of somebody's yard. So I don't want to be there too long. And, this car is just parked there. Luckily there's no cars coming by, but the car is just in the middle of the road, with the brake light on. So he finally comes over. He's taking his time. So I get angry and I say, F this, excuse my French. F this. man, I'm out of here. And then he comes over me and said, no, man, wait a minute. So as he reaches over me, like to prevent me from leaving, I testify that the gun hits my hand and it goes off.
The gun goes off.
The gun goes off as he's trying to prevent me from, aborting the robbery. The gun goes off. I don't know where it hits. I just know it went off. It was facing down towards the back of the gentleman.
Did you suspect he got hit?
I suspected that he may have got hit because after the shot, I glanced at a second. He didn't move. Nothing happened. I figured, well, maybe he's just playing dead or he's just being quiet because I didn't see no blood. I didn't see anything. So I just ran back to the car and we left. Later, found out obviously that he had died.
How much later?
Approximately 2 to 3 days later, I found out that he had died because Steve and his friends came and told me the guy died.
And how did they know? It was in the paper?
No, I come to find out that they told me because detectives had came to them and were inquiring about their homicide.
That's right. Okay, so 3-4 days later, Nanushka's brother, Steve, says, hey, we got to talk. And he tells you, hey, somebody you think saw the car, the police are asking questions. And you're like, wait a minute. It was pitch black. We were the only ones there.
Yeah.
Nobody saw anything. What's going on here?
Exactly. So, later on, they came by and, again, they wanted to talk to me and express to me, hey, man, detectives came and they talked to us. They're looking for information about the homicide. And, it might be wise for you to leave town for a little while. And immediately all kind of red flags started going up in my head. Like, how? I mean, wait a minute. Who talked to you? How they talked to you? Nobody saw it. You know what I'm saying? Well, they said they saw a car. Okay, they saw the car, but how they know to come to you?
Right.
Right.
Then automatically I just smelled like something ain't right here. This is all wrong. And later on, I find out, I go into trial that, they were informants.
Real quick question.
Yeah, sure.
Had you ever shot a gun before that?
I had shot a gun, but never had nobody. You know what I'm saying? I shot, just playing around in the park or near Crystal Lake. I don't know if they still have that down here down south, but it used to be a place called Crystal Lake where they used to do paint gun fighting. So you go back there and shoot and just mess around.
Now, your mother, you come home one day.
Yeah.
This is November of 1989.
Yes.
You come home and your mom says, hey, Jose, are you okay? And you said, yeah, I'm fine. Why? She said, well, the police were here looking for you. So first of all, how did the police find you?
Okay, so interesting how they find me, which also puts all these pieces together. The police end up finding me through a high school yearbook. So Detective Nyberg and his colleague, when I was later interrogated, told me that Steve and these guys told them that a guy named Ace did the homicide. So I have a tattoo on my arm named Ace. It was my street name and my DJ name. And so the only name that they had to go on was this Ace name, this alias. Nanushka, none of her brothers or family knew my real name, but they knew how I looked. So they was trying to find a photo of me to identify who I was. So come to find out that the detective went to Southridge because they knew I went to school there, and they went looking through the yearbooks to see if they can point me out. And so happened my freshman year, I took a high school picture. It was the only year that I took a high school picture.
Right.
And they pinned me there. That's how they were able to find my name. And then obviously in finding my name, the school was able to give them my address and therefore find where I was living at.
So the police show up at your mom's apartment, your apartment with your mom.
Yeah.
And they find you. They come and you're there, correct?
Yes.
And they want to ask you a few questions.
Yes.
But this is interesting because it's more than just asking you a few questions.
Yes.
All of a sudden, they drive you 25 miles downtown and arrest you, correct?
Correct. So as I come into the apartment, my mother, she asked me, and my nickname is Nerei. She said, Nerei, in Spanish, this is a Spanish dialogue, so I'm translating for you. What's going on? You okay? There was some police officers around here looking for you. I'm like, for what, Mom? What's up? And so as I'm having a dialogue with her, there's a knock on the door. So she goes to the door and open. It's Detective Nyberg and the other detective that was with him. that come in. So they tell my mother, hey, could we talk to your son? We would like to just, drive around the neighborhood right quick, ask him a few questions, and we'll bring him right back, which obviously was a blatant lie, because as soon as I got into the car, we did not drive anywhere near our neighborhood. We immediately got on the expressway and went downtown. That deception was to separate my mother from me so that I would not have any sort of representation, and to get me alone as an ignorant juvenile, nonetheless guilty.
You were 16 years
I
old.
was 16, and to get me to try to incriminate myself. So they took me directly downtown and then put me in a room and then showed me a stack of transcripts and, the whole bad cop, good cop, hey, you want a cigarette, though, spiel, and, make you wait it out and then tell you, you will talk to your mom later after you answer some questions. Blah, blah, blah.
Did you admit your guilt to them in interrogation?
In the interrogation, I end up admitting my guilt to try to nullify the charges against me. He said that, hey man, you're looking at first-degree murder, maybe death penalty. You got to give us some information what happened, because Chad and Steve are saying that, you're the man, blah, blah, blah. And so in my ignorance, I didn't realize that the best thing for me to do was to shut up, shut your mouth. And thinking I'm going to help myself, I began to tell my side of the version. Hey man, wasn't my idea. I didn't want to rob nobody. I just wanted to go home. If anything I did wrong, man, I had some guns. Okay, if you want to bust me for that, okay, that is, but this ain't me. I tried to abort this. I'm not into robbing nobody. But
did any of that come out during the trial? That your story? They didn't let you testify.
No, my state appointed attorney advised me not to testify, and I think that was the worst move I could have made. But mind you, as a juvenile, you're hoping and you're wishing that these attorneys have your best interests in mind.
So you feel like your state appointed attorney didn't necessarily give you the best representation you might have had if you had maybe more wealth, a better attorney?
Oh yeah, no doubt. Because I think we was trying to push, the abandonment, because I attempted to abort this. So this shooting was an accident. It wasn't an intent, an intention just to do somebody harm. So I think with the proper representation, it could have been different. But now let me add a caveat to all of that. And let me say this. I do not in no way, shape, form, or fashion regret the time I've done. I deserve what I got.
Right.
Somebody's life was taken, and I accept full responsibility, whether it was by ignorance or by choice. I do not in no way, shape, form, or fashion justify it or try to nullify it. I've done the time, and I accept the responsibility for it. Even if other people should have been there with me, I'm cool and I'm okay with me doing the life sentence and them guys going home.
Right. Well, now that you've said that, let me jump ahead before we come back, because here you are, you commit this terrible crime. You got involved at a young age. Somebody lost their life. An innocent man lost his life.
Yes.
You've been paroled after 28, almost 29 years. So what do you say to the people who say, why should you even get out of prison? You killed a man. He'll never be free. Why should you get out? How do you answer people who believe that?
Number one, my first response is, I've done the required time that the state of Florida and the legislature required for me to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I fulfilled that obligation. Number two, I am more of an asset to the community out here than I am in there. The difference in who I am today as opposed to who I was is like night and day. There is a consistent pattern. Even if you look at my prison record, there's a consistent pattern of reform, transformation, and outreach to even my community while in prison. Obviously, for those who know, I was a part of Role Models 5,000, Toastmasters, and different ministry opportunities. And so I was able to help men from the inside. So it comes a point in time where people need a second chance. And mind you, when I say a second chance, not a handout, but an opportunity to show myself worthy. And that's all I was looking for throughout those years. An opportunity to show myself worthy and deserving of a second chance, to make a difference, to show that I'm not who I was as a juvenile.
Let me ask you this question. Let's jump back to 1990. You're 17 years old.
Mm-hmm.
You're sent and you were tried as an adult at the age of 16, and you're sent to an adult prison. Explain to people watching and listening why a 16 or 17-year-old adolescent who commits who's convicted of first-degree murder is charged as an adult and sent to an adult prison.
As a 16-year-old, first going to the county jail, allow me to say that the county jail for juveniles, Dade County Jail, is a very violent place. It's a place where we fought a lot, and we fought over territorial gripes, who was from down south and who's from city. Right. Mind you, while you're there, you're told all the horror stories of prison, that they're going to try to rape you, they're going to try to manipulate you, steal your stuff. You got to protect yourself. You got to get ready to fight or become somebody's lover. If I can use a good term there and not use some type of profanity. Right. So going to prison as a juvenile, you have, as I shared with you the other day, you have two options: either fight or flight. Either you're going to man up, and if you're going to have to hurt somebody, so that a precedent is set that this kid you're not going to mess with, or if you're going to mess with him, it may cost you your life. Or you're going to flight, run, go check in. Check in is a term where you go to the officer station and you ask to be placed in protective management because you can't deal with the inmate population out of fear of being raped, manipulated, or abused.
But the question I was asking is, why is a 16 or 17-year-old sent to an adult prison? And isn't that because when you're charged with first-degree murder, by law, that's an adult crime. And once they find you guilty, they don't care if you're 15 years old. Exactly. You're an adult in the state's eyes. So correct?
Correct. Okay. State law says, especially in 1989, that when you commit a capital felony, your juvenile status is adjudicated to an adult. So as a juvenile with a first-degree murder charge, you do not go to a juvenile institution or some juvenile rehabilitation facility. You're immediately adjudicated and bonded over to an adult facility because of the seriousness of your crime. And that's a Florida law statute.
You're a 16-year-old, 17-year-old kid going to a very violent prison, right? Okay. Are they preying on you? I mean, you walk through that door and they're seeing a kid, in essence, right?
Yes.
Were they preying on you at that point, or how did you avoid being preyed upon?
By God's grace, I did go to a maximum security prison. Dade CI was my first institution, but it was not the most violent institution in the state of Florida. Rayford, FSP, there were other institutions that were more violent and more, shall I say, heinous. Though at the time, upon arriving there, as I expressed, your disposition as a person, how you carry yourself as you walk off the bus, will determine oftentimes the course of how the rest of your stay in prison is going to be. And what I mean by that is, if you give the persona or the perception as you're soft, timid, or weak, I used the term in our conversation of the day, Mr. Wolfe, that the opportunistic buzzards, these vultures that are in the Department of Correction, these predators will come out and prey upon you. They will use manipulative tactics, or some will use straight brute force to get what they want out of it.
But how did you know? I mean, you're 16, 17. How did you know that you had to carry yourself that way walking into that prison for the very first time?
I got a glimpse of that because of while in the county jail, used to have trustees from the other floors, the older guys who had been to prison, and they would, drop lines to us and let us know, Jit, you need to get tight, you need to get right, you need to get ready to fight. And so we already knew, most of us already knew that when we go to prison, you need to fight. And if you're not big enough to fight, you need to go find you a weapon, so that if somebody come upon you, if you have to stab them, you got to do what you got to do to survive or become somebody's girl. for better terms.
You were told, somebody took you aside. I want you to talk a little bit about this. Somebody took you aside, took you under their wing to help you learn the ropes. And they told you that you had to be prepared because at your age, they were going to try to manipulate you for money, manipulate you for sex, and rape.
Right.
So how did you avoid all that? And what were the mistakes that others made your age who didn't escape all that?
So there was an older gentleman when I moved into the dormitory. He came to me and he seemed like to be one of the cool guys, the positive guys. And let me preface this by saying that everybody in prison is not a bad guy. You have some really good dudes in there that that are awesome people. Now you do have garbage and maggots, and that's what I call them because that's how they carry themselves. This one particular gentleman came to me and said, "Jit, man, let me spit into your ear." That's a term of let me share some wisdom with you. He said, "Man, if you want to do good time, if you want to make it out here alive, I'm gonna tell you 3 things." He said, "Number 1, mind your business. Number 2, keep your mouth shut. Number 3, stay to yourself. Because if nobody knows what you're doing and they think and you stay to yourself and you're not very talkative, then they're going to think either a couple of things about you. Either you're crazy or you're a psychopath or you might do them harm. So don't give them a reason to think anything otherwise. Stay to yourself. Be quiet. Shut your mouth and your time will go by pretty good."
That's how you survived 29 years in prison?
For the most part, yes.
How would you describe daily prison life to the average person watching this show?
Wow. Daily prison life is a microcosm of normal society. In prison, you have drug dealings, you have rapes, you have smuggling, you have shooting. I mean, not gun shooting, but you have, dope shooting, alcohol. I mean, stuff is smuggled in and out. So a lot of stuff you have on the streets, you can get in prison. Percocets, Mollies, you see it in there. Okay. In the same vein, prison is one of the most segregated places on the planet. And what I mean by that, the pedophiles hang with the pedophiles. The thugs and hoodlums, they hang usually with themselves, and the murderers and all the guys that have the code of ethics, prison code of ethics, good crimes, they're there. The educated guys go to school trying to get their GED, and then you have the dope guys and the slime balls, they're in their area. And so even when you go into chow hall, people segregate and sit to their kind. It's not really based upon race. It's based upon your social or your cultural agenda, where you feel like you relate most. And so people gravitate and into cliques into that. Even in dormitories, they do
not much different than society.
Right.
Yeah.
So you weren't necessarily in a gang. You were just with people that you identified with.
Yes, sir. I always associated myself with the guys who wanted to better themselves, wanted to get an education, wanted to find a way to get a second chance in the law books, trying to find a new law, a new case to get out of prison. And I want to say something, if I can, Mr. Wolfe.
Sure.
You mentioned about me being paroled, but I have to remind everyone I wasn't paroled. I went back and got resentenced under the juvenile law. And so the life sentence was taken from me, and I was giving a sentence that EOS'd me from the courthouse.
Well, you would have been paroled.
I would have been.
However, because the sentences were consecutive, you would have then faced 2 additional 15-year sentences.
Exactly.
But because the juvenile law changed,
Yes.
you were resentenced.
Yes, sir.
So everything changed. But you were actually very fortunate, lucky, blessed, because that legislation changed, and a lot of guys in your situation would have just been resentenced back to life, correct?
Yes.
Explain that.
Okay, so the whole vein of that, in February 19th of 2018, the parole commission came to me to offer me parole. And what that entailed was me being paroled out of my life sentence into a consecutive 15-year sentence that the court gave me in 89, which was followed by a consecutive 6 months county time for contempt of court for refusing to testify against my co-defendant. So in essence, what would have happened if I would have accepted parole by the parole commission, I would have been paroled out of the life to start a 15-year sentence. So I would have never left Everglades Correctional. I would still be there right now, having to do at least 8 years on that 15-year bid. And then after those 8 years would have been done, sometime in the future, I would have to go to the county jail to do 6 months time. So I rejected parole because there was a motion in court under the new law, the new juvenile offender law, for resentencing. And April 18th, I went back to court, and the judge commuted all those sentences into one, gave me 50 years and released me with 1 year probation. And after 1 year probation, the probation was terminated, and I'm free completely today.
Wow.
And 2 months after my release, subsequently, as we were talking about, the law changed and the door was closed. And so a lot of my brothers, juvenile offenders who are in prison under parole, have been unable to go home as I have, because the state legislature changed the law.
Wow. So 2 months
after release
later,
yeah,
if it had been 2 months later, you'd still be sitting there.
I'd still be in prison.
And you're a productive member of our society right now. I
Yes,
mean,
sir.
And you know what's fascinating to me, Jose, is when you got out of prison, you actually had a fair amount of money
Yes.
that you had saved up. So a couple questions. Number one, how did you make money in prison? I know you said you had a little loan sharking operation going on.
Yeah.
But in addition to that, I mean, when you got out, you actually had enough money to buy yourself a car.
Yes.
Talk about that.
Initially, when I first came into the prison, I did continue like a little petty crime. So I was doing loan sharking, and that in the Department of Correction is illegal. You get caught, you go to confinement. But after that phase, as I began to seek, transformation and become a new person, I began working within the Department of Correction in different programs. Where initially I started in the kitchen working for Infomart, and started making a little money there. Then I went to working in the canteen, and the canteen used to pay a salary of $75 a month. Now as of like 4 or 5 years ago, they dropped it to $50 a month. But with the money I was making, I began to save, and I learned a skill from a friend of mine while at Avon Park Correctional Institution of investing money into mutual funds and learning stocks and currency trading. So upon learning some of these skills, I began to save money and invested in a mutual fund, Putnam Investments, upon my release, before my release, I helped my mother buy her second home. I gave her the money for the closing. So I was able to play a part in giving back to my mother, who I love so dearly. And before my release, upon my release, April 18th of June 1st, 2018, I left the Department of Corrections with $15,000 cash from monies that I had saved.
Take us through this. So here you're doing a life sentence in prison, and you write to Putnam Investments, and they send you an application. You fill it out, you mail it in, and then how do you send money to them?
So every month, the Department of Corrections allow you to do a withdrawal from your inmate account. So if my mother needed some money, I can get a withdrawal form and I can take money out and send it to my mother. And it'll be a check with the Department of Corrections logo on it, but she could, cash it on. So in the same vein, I opened an account with Putnam Investments. Every month I would withdraw money and send it to the investment firm, and they would invest it for me. And I began to make dividends and increase.
And then besides Putnam Investments, then you're putting money in foreign currencies?
In foreign currencies, the currency trade.
While you're in prison?
While I was in prison. Now, that was a little trickier way. I had to send money to my mother, and then I would call her during times when we had phone call, and I would tell her, hey, Mom, buy 2 calls on the euro dollar, and then sell here and buy there. And that's how we would do that.
And then when you got out, you had enough money to help your mother and buy a car.
I bought a Lexus IS 250 upon my release. The state gave me no money. They usually give you $50 upon release if you're indigent. But because I had so much money, they didn't give me a dime. I didn't want it anyway.
Now, one of the things you're doing now that you're trying to speak to people and communicate with people, and you're trying to teach people that prison is not just a place of punishment.
Right.
It really should be viewed as a place where people can help themselves. Talk about that a little bit.
Okay, so every time I speak to young guys, either on the street corner in church or youth outreach,
Mhm.
I always try to paint a different portrait of prison, because the common portrait you get from Hollywood or from, rap and whatever, is always this doom and gloom, dark side of prison. And yes, there is a dark side to prison. But I want to use the opportunity right now to also paint another side, another portrait of prison. Prison can be a place of transformation, reformation, and new creation. And what I'm saying with that is that for a lot of guys like myself, prison was not a downfall. Prison was a stepping stone towards success. It was a place where we were able to gather ourselves, make up our minds about what we wanted to do, change the course of our destiny, and apply ourselves to education, higher learning, and to become better men, better leaders, and to go home and make a difference to our families. And so that type of portrait, or that picture, that course, is contingent upon the individual. When a man gets to a place where he's sick and tired and he's had enough, that's where change begins to happen. So for some men, all it takes is one time falling. Obviously, there are some men in prison who've been in prison 11 times. I know men with J letters. J. That means you've been in prison like approximately 11 times in and out of prison. But their bids are normally 2 years, 3-year bids, and they do like a year and a half. They never had really nothing taken from them. But the men who have suffered and had half their life taken from them, or had their families and saw so much taken away, they are more apt to seek change and want something different, because they realize that suffering and pain, they don't want it anymore, and they don't want to see it for anyone else in their life. That prison is not nothing to be glamorized, but neither is it a tomb where you to die at. It can be a place of triumph, a place where you can rise up out of the ashes like a phoenix and create a new destiny for yourself.
So how did you use this concept for you? Mm-hmm. How did José Nerey use this concept to improve yourself?
I use this concept to improve myself by, number one, education. Now, let me say, my number one inspiration was my mother, right?
Mm-hmm. She's still alive?
She's still alive.
How old is she?
She is now 72 years old.
Okay.
And so my mother saw me walk out the door as a 16-year-old boy, and she hadn't seen me since. And every time she would come to prison, to the jail, she would drive, up to Orlando area to come see me, spend hours on the road, her hard-earned dollars, and she would cry, because she would cry for her baby. I'm her youngest son. And I bowed to her. I said, Mom, please stay alive till I get home. And I'm going to take care of you. I promise. I'm going to be there for you because you've been there for me. And there's nobody on this planet who has done more for me than her.
Has that been the worst? Maybe the worst part of all this was the suffering you caused your mother?
That is the worst part of it. Being in a courtroom as I'm getting sentenced and watching her eyes flood with tears as she sees her baby for the last time, that she can touch him or hold him. Right. And that was a motivating factor for me for change, because, the last thing as we were going out, she said, baby, just make it home for me. I said, I promise, Mom, So that was one of the reasons for change. The second, obviously you should change for yourself, because you want better for yourself. But she was the kicker. I'm gonna be honest with you. She pushed me to that place. My love for her and her love for me was what drove me to change. And in the process of that, I grabbed hold to it with a bulldog tenacity, and I ran for it, and I did.
We've got about a minute and a half to go. So yes. I think in closing, I think you have become the asset of the community that you've talked about. You work at a water treatment center in Hialeah.
Yes.
You're still helping the men at the Corrections Transition Program.
Yes, sir.
You're involved with 5,000 role models where the kids come out to the prison and you speak to them. Yeah. And you're also doing very admirable ministry work and Bible studies, correct?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Well, congratulations on your transition. You're an impressive guy, and I welcome you back to this show whenever you want.
I just want to say that I'm so honored, at the opportunity you've provided for me just to share my story. I'm grateful, and, in any way that I can be a blessing, not only to men going home, to this program, to anything, that's where I want to be, and that's what we're about.
Well, today. Thank you for being here. Thank you. Yeah. Andy, final words?
And that makes a difference, my friend, José Nerey. I mean, that really does make a difference in people's lives. The things you've said, you've been so eloquent here today. And, you're a productive member of society now, man. God bless you. Really.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you all so much for tuning in to another episode of Men Going Home. We'll be back next week with another episode. Thank you all so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.